Hello, everyone, and welcome to Connected with Jen and Shannon, where storytelling meets transformation. I'm Shannon, a communications trainer and coach.
And I'm Jen, a speech-language pathologist and academic. Here's where leaders in neuroscience, philosophy, spirituality, and the arts come together to share personal stories and powerful strategies for connection and reimagine what it means to be fully human.
All right, everyone, we are so excited to bring on today's guest, Dr. Roger Walsh. He is an MD, a PhD, a physician, a psychiatrist, a longtime meditation practitioner, and one of the wisest voices of our times. He has spent decades exploring the world's greatest wisdom traditions, as well as the psychological and spiritual tools that help us live with more clarity and compassion.
Shannon, we are so lucky to have Dr. Roger Walsh on the show. I don't even know how we got this lucky in our lives, but I will take it. I will take it. Roger writes and teaches about the great challenges we face: social division, the rise of AI, climate change, and all are symptoms of something deeper, the state of our minds and hearts. And one of his core teachings is that we are always in relationship with ourselves, with others, with nature, even with technology, and how we relate determines whether we create harmony or harm, growth or collapse.
That insight really struck me because it's actually the heart of our entire podcast, right? Connected is built on the relationship between Jen and I, the relationship with you, our listeners. Each episode is a chance to practice relating wisely. Not just listening for information, but actually transformation.
And Roger brings up this really important point when he speaks about wisdom. He divides questions into two categories: wisdom questions and knowledge. Knowledge questions have a discernible answer. However, wisdom questions require different responses depending on the context or the times. What we need to do is be sure to match the moment when we're looking for answers for wisdom questions, and he will talk all about that. You'll be very interested to hear. And we really want to share this with you too. Shannon and I had the opportunity to learn Dharma yoga practice directly from Dr. Roger Walsh. For him, Dharma yoga isn't just about stretching on a mat. It's about weaving together physical, psychological, ethical, and spiritual practices into a life of integrity.
I know, Jen, I love this because it's a way of aligning body, mind, and spirit with the deeper truths of reality so that we're not just talking about wisdom, we're actually living it. And that brings us to one of the most important discussions of our time: how we relate in 2025 to social media. And Roger talks about how these platforms are actually shaping our attention. It's shaping our relationships and even our sense of identity, which is kind of weird, and how easily that social media can pull us towards division and distraction. But at the same time, he invites us to ask, what would it look like if we engage with technology more wisely, with discernment instead of addiction, with awareness instead of autopilot?
So Roger pulls all these themes together in this amazing talk. He talks about living in relationship, AI, Dharma yoga, social media, and it's a way of navigating and embodying life. He doesn't give us a quick fix, but a set of orientations to help us become more grounded and more connected.
So as you listen today, we invite you to reflect on your own relationships with yourself, with others, with technology, with the natural world. How are you relating? And what would it look like to bring a little more wisdom, compassion, and practice into those connections?
We are so honored to bring you today's guest, Dr. Roger Walsh. We're so happy you're here.
Feeling lost in the noise of social media? Inspo cuts through the clutter, connecting you directly with real insights from real experts and industry leaders. It's a new social network dedicated to knowledge sharing, industry insights, and thought leadership. Get the latest from top minds in your field, or build your own thought leadership portfolio on Inspo. already trusted by thousands of professionals worldwide. Be part of the conversation and download Inspo Experts today on the App Store or visit www.inspo.expert.
So, Roger, it is so wonderful to have you here on Connected with Jen and Shannon. We both have been reading your most recent article, The Dance of Duality. We are related to all and always relating. And we've been thinking a lot about living in relation. We've been talking about it with our most recent guest, Donnie McClurkin, and thinking about living in relation rather than living in reaction. And I don't even know if that is a polarity that you would consider, relation versus reaction. But where do you sit with that? How would you define living in relation? How could we potentially get to that place? As you just mentioned, that alone might take us 3 days to talk about, but we're so excited to learn your insights. So let's hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, that's yes, that's a big one. It seems a little paradoxical to say, how can we learn to live in relation? Because we always already are in relationship. We're inescapably connected with all and everything, in some ways, subtle or gross. And I think one of the emerging themes across multiple fields of knowledge and wisdom is that that relationship is inherent to existence, and that's been a theme of contemplative traditions for millennia. The idea of our interconnection, perhaps most forcefully or beautifully articulated in, for example, the Hindu image of the net of Indra, which is this vast cosmic net with a jewel at each node, and every jewel reflects every other jewel. So it's this beautiful image of not only profound interconnection, but profound interdependence and interaction. So there's that. There's a Confucian idea of harmony as one of the core values of life. There's the Buddhist idea of interdependent origination, that we are inherently interconnected and can't help but affect one another. And then there are contemporary scientific and philosophical views which recognize, for example, even down to the fundamental levels of some interpretations of quantum physics, that reality is fundamentally relational. So it feels less like a question of how do we become related, and more one of how do we recognize our relationship and respond skillfully to that recognition.
So it's not really about getting along with people or that's it, right? It's more about reality itself is relational. I kind of think about this podcast, right? Jen and I, it wouldn't exist without the two of us coming together. It's almost as if when we're together, like you said, each of these little gems that kind of shine, Jen and I make each other shine. And that's a part of this podcast that we've put together. So it's actually reality itself.
Well, maybe all of the above. You have your beautiful relationship, the two of you, and you have your beautiful relationship with your family and children. And the more closely we look, the more we realize that there's actually a boundless network of interdependence. And it's very beautiful. You do something like the traditional practice of saying grace or gratitude for a meal, and you start thinking about all the people who contributed to this. And if you think deeply enough, you realize that there's this enormous number of people who labored and worked to plant the food and harvest it and bring it to us and prepare it. But beyond that, there's a whole network of people supporting each of those people. And there's a vast infrastructure that people have created to create the tools and technology and so forth that their work depended on. And then eventually you come to realize there's almost no one on the planet who wasn't involved in some way in getting this meal to me. And it really is a very beautiful reflection to realize we are the beneficiaries of a boundless network of benefactors.
I love that. You know what it makes me think of is just what you'd said earlier about it's out there. We are connected, of course, but how do we recognize it? And I think so often we are moving too fast to notice. We're moving too fast to notice, to take a moment for that gratitude before a meal, to think about the interconnectedness of, as you're mentioning, virtually every person on the planet who put some work in to get this meal to my table. Um, we're just moving too fast. So I'm just wondering, where do we go from here if that's where we are?
Well, Jen, basically you're pointing to one of the really important issues, not only of recognizing relationship, but of and relating to people we're related with, but also just relating to life, and that many of the qualities of heart and mind which allow us to relate more skillfully with people we know are also the ones which allow us to be sensitive to and relate with and harmonize with the world in general or with society. So, and there's a whole, and then you're pointing to the point that, yeah, so how do we become sensitive enough to recognize what's already there and sensitive enough to feel what the appropriate responses that are called for in each moment from each of us. And that's a sensitivity which is, in large part, it's a skill. And it's a skill which is at the heart of the world's contemplative traditions. It's a skill which calls us to quiet our minds and our lives and develop an awareness first to our own experience, our own hearts and minds, because that's what we know each other and the world through. So, and there you have the whole family of the world's contemplative practices, for example, that are designed for many things. I mean, they have many benefits, and there's an enormous amount of research on that, but one of them is they just sensitize us to our experience, or they kind of rehabilitate our ability to experience, which, as you said, Jen, gets lost in the contemporary frenetic pace and hyperstimulation of contemporary society.
Roger, what real world benefits would we see, right, if our populace saw us all as interconnected beings, part of this web of consciousness? What would that look like? What would our worlds look like if we started to see each other as interconnected beings?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Now, I'm going to ask it back of you in a moment. Uh, let's see. It feels like the quality of our relationships and the care with which we treat each other is a
Mm.
function uh, of our capacity to feel with, that's empathy, and feel for, that's compassion, others. And so my assumption is that the more we develop our sensitivity in our own open hearts and minds, to that extent, we will naturally tend to be more sensitive to what's called for in each moment and more sensitive to the needs of each person and better able, because we're less distracted, to then enact the responses that are called for. Well, that's a first pass. Would you like to add anything?
You know what I'm thinking is, right, if I set my, like, if I had to set my dial, if I had to tune in, if I could tune myself into love, right? If I could take all the distraction out, like, my anger, my frustration, my like inability to choose from the 75 different kinds of mayonnaise on the shelf, whatever, right? If I could tune it to just love, right? I gotta love what's in front of me. And I guess love and presence. I gotta be here right now. And in this moment, can I be filled with love? Then Maybe that's a start, Roger. I don't know.
Sounds like a pretty good start. Maybe maybe we'd say love as a foundation, and a clear heart mind, which is sensitive to others, and the compassion, all those things. Yeah, beautiful.
Compassion is a tricky thing for us humans, right? It's often we have compassion so easily for other people, but then when it comes to having compassion for ourselves, it becomes much more difficult. So, what does it look like to begin relating to ourselves with compassion, instead of judgment?
Yeah. Well, first I'd nuance the idea that it's easy for us to feel compassion for others. There certainly can be automatic reactions of care and compassion, but the wisdom traditions teach us that this is a skill. One of the great skills of being human is how to have as our major or dominant response to suffering, caring for, um, but and second, to extend the range of those for whom we care from initially as kids, we're egocentric. It's about me and mine.
Mm.
Then with development, we tend to become ethnocentric. That is, we care for our tribe, our group, or whatever it is. And that's where most of the population is. But there are further developmental possibilities. And beyond the ethnocentric is the world-centric. That is the care for all people. And that opens a whole range of possibilities. But beyond even that, there's a kind of what some people call cosmocentric. That is a care for all creation. So I would just nuance and say that, yes, in some cases it is easier to feel compassion for others, and we may not appreciate the full scope and potential of compassion, just how deep it can go, how pure it can become, how encompassing it can mature to be. So that's one thought. Then for ourselves, here we look, as you mentioned, Shannon, there's a whole issue of judgment and condemnation and what's called the judgmental mind, and how to work with that and heal that is is a challenge. It's not. It's an ongoing project. I think maybe it'd be important to interpolate something here, and that is, we probably should note the kind of questions you're asking, because there are two really importantly different kinds of questions, and the distinction isn't often made. The first are knowledge questions, like, is it raining outside? Take a look out the window. That's the end of that question. But then there are wisdom questions, and wisdom questions are more like koans. They're questions that don't have a one-time answer, and that every time you ask them have the potential for taking us deeper into the question, deeper into ourselves, and deeper into life. So the question, how do we develop compassion, or how do we develop gentle care for ourselves? It's important to know these are wisdom questions, and there's no one-time answer. And we may well be asking these questions for the rest of our life, which would be great, because it would mean we're going deeper and deeper with this into the whole art of self-acceptance, or radical acceptance, as sometimes called. And that's a skill. And of course, we can point to some practices, but it's important to know that this is an art, and it's not a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice. So begin with simply being aware of our self-condemnation and recognizing that it's not helpful. if we've got inveterate habits that just stick around, if you look deeply enough, there's usually some underlying belief that we need them. We need this behavior. An underlying self-condemnation and attack can be a variety of beliefs, such as, I need this to motivate myself. If I don't goad myself, I'll just sit around and vegetate. There can be beliefs about our inherent lack of worth. And closely related to self-condemnation is guilt. And guilt is just a very destructive emotion. There's an important distinction to be made between regret, which is healthy regret, and destructive guilt. And regret can be a very wise recognition that, oh, I could have done better. I wish I had, and maybe I can learn from that. But guilt is regret plus self-condemnation. And self-condemnation is extra and just creates suffering. And if it goes along with beliefs such as I'm bad or I'm unworthy or I deserve to be punished, which it often does, then those are beliefs which need addressing. So, we're just touching the surface here, but maybe just to note as a beginning that that self-condemnation and guilt are just not helpful. They do not serve a useful purpose for adults. Maybe in childhood they served a transitional value of getting us to, not do dangerous things. But most of us just don't outgrow that and just live with an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering.
Wow, there is so much to unpack there. Shannon, do you mind if I ask a question
Yes,
first? And I
please do.
know you've got a lot that you're interested in asking too.
Let's hear it, Jen.
All right. I'm going to go way back. And when you were mentioning the kinds of questions that we were posing, and I love that you just helped me to frame questions in two different categories. Well, for this podcast, knowledge questions and wisdom questions. And that it's this art in answering a wisdom question that it may have a different answer in different eras. Okay, so this is what I want to ask. Or this is what I'm thinking about. You tell me if I'm onto something, Roger. So my next question was going to be, after we talked about compassion, was, right now we're living in a world where we're not finding a lot of compassion for other people. Everybody's angry at everybody else for everything, right? And I wanted to ask you what's the practice for that? What's the solution, right? And now I'm realizing, right, this is an art, and there are different responses in different times for an answer to a question like that. So I'm just riffing here, but 100 years ago, maybe there was a different way to relate, that we could find compassion for others, or that we could get outside of our disagreements. And maybe now it needs to be in a different place. Am I following you there about kind of the art of responding to a question around wisdom and compassion?
Yeah, well, I think you've pointed to a couple of important things there, Jen. That, at different times, and I would nuance that and add to it by saying, not just different eras, but even moment to moment. The appropriate response 5 minutes from now might be quite different from the one, in this moment. So what it requires is what's sometimes called a fluid appropriateness. That is, and to respond in ways which are skillful, and in this specific case, compassionate, and most effective in relieving suffering, requires a sensitivity to this moment right now, and a response that matches that moment. A moment to moment, it may be different.
Matching the moment. And then this brings up a theme that we commonly have on the podcast too, is about living in complexity, right? So this fluid appropriateness relates deeply, it seems, to the complex times that we're living in, right? Because we need to be matching the moment, which is usually complex.
Yeah, usually it is. Yes, indeed.
We were talking a lot about regret versus guilt. Oh my goodness. The distinction that you made there is really mind blowing to me. I mean, that is so important in my framing of um, looking into look, there are things I've done that I really wish I didn't do, but I can look at it with regret, or I can look at it with guilt and shame. And those are two entirely different mindsets, which will lead me forward in two entirely different ways. So what I wanted to ask then is, what about a society then that is condemning and placing guilt and shame on someone else, right? Shouldn't we instead place regret on someone else, right? If someone hurts me, if someone hurts my community, rather than condemning and shaming, is there another way that I can react that responds a little bit more appropriately? I mean, some bad things happen, right? So how do I respond in a way that is healthy and yet recognizes this act, this harmful
Yeah.
act?
Yeah, and I just want to note the process you went through there. You started out talking about society in general and what should we do. And then as you spoke, you focused it down into the very skillful question, well, what can I do? And that's a very important shift or acknowledgement that you went through there, because with social, or particularly social or national problems, or even global problems, there's a automatic tendency to go to the place of they should do this or they should do that, or etc. They shouldn't do this or they shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And a little reflection makes us realize that for any major issue, any big picture issue, the question of what can be done always comes back, if we really look, to what can I do? Because yes, it'd be wonderful if they fixed the world and the country and politics and other things. And that's not the way change works. It always comes back, if we're looking to be really to be effective, to what can I do? And actually it goes deeper than that, because there's a series of questions when we're facing issues of enormous complexity, as you've both pointed to, when the world is facing multiple threats to its survival, when civilization is even at risk from multiple causes. Yeah, these are enormous questions. And so as we think about them, then the question becomes, over time, for each of these, well, what can I do? And that's a beautiful place to start, but it's not the final place, because deeper still than the question, what can I do, is the question, what do I feel called to do? What particular kind of suffering calls me? What makes my heart sing, or touches my heartstrings? What I really want to do? And the reality is we're much more likely to be enthusiastic and effective in doing something we feel called to. And then the third question is, below that, or complementing it, is, what's the most strategic thing I can do? Okay, we live very fortunate lives. We have a lot of opportunities. We've had a lot of education, skills. So with all the things we could do, what's the most strategic thing? What is going to allow little me to have most impact? This is a deep question. And again, it's a wisdom question, which is important to acknowledge. And it's also a question, it's been around for a long time, way back in Greek philosopher who said, "Give me a place to stand and a lever long enough, I'll move the world." In our contemporary times, Buckminster Fuller was the genius who pointed to the trim tab factor, the idea of, you look at the back of a huge rudder on a 747, it's got a little rudder at the back, which is a trim tab, and you just you just move the trim tab one way, the rudder moves the other way, and the whole plane moves. So it's this art of how do we find the place where we can be most effective? And then if we really want to play the game, what I think of as the Buckminster Fuller game, because Buckminster Fuller is a beautiful story about him in his early life. He lost a son, I think a child died, and he was bankrupted. And he contemplated suicide, and he asked, well, what would make worth life living? What would make life worth living? Yeah. And the answer that came to him was seeing how much good one person can do. And he went on to do an awful lot of good and really had an enormous impact on the world. So the question for anyone who wants to really play a worthwhile game, perhaps the most worthwhile game there is, how can I live my life so as to be an optimal instrument of service? And in some ways, it's a beautiful question that Buckminster Fuller formulated. In another way, it's a perennial question, most precisely articulated by the Buddhists in their bodhisattva aspiration. The bodhisattva aspiration is, for the Buddhists, the highest good is to bring people to awakening, because awakening relieves people of enormous amounts of suffering and allows them to have open hearts and minds and respond skillfully. And so for the Buddhist way of putting the Bucky Fuller question is, okay, how can I live so as to awaken as fully as I can and cultivate my capacities as fully as I can so as to help others, all others, awaken and fulfill their capacities and lives as fully as possible? It's a beautiful, beautiful aspiration. So your question takes us very deep.
Jen and I often talk about inner work for outer change. And that's kind of what this reminds me of. When you say the state of the world reflects the state of our minds. And that kind of stops me in my tracks, because I think of what the heck is going on in all of our minds right now with the influx of tragedy that we have in front of us and suffering all the time. So,
Indeed.
So what does that mean for our future, right? If the universe is kind of is a mirror to what's going on inside.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd be interested to hear what you conclude from it. For myself, what I take that to imply in light of the questions we've just been exploring, that is, how can, what can I do? How can, what calls me, and what's the most skillful thing I can do? It seems like, okay, if what we call our global problems are actually global symptoms, if they're symptoms of our individual and collective psychological and spiritual dysfunctions and immaturities, then the implication is that if we just try to handle the outer problems, we're actually just dealing with the symptoms. We're not dealing with the inner causes, which I think is what you were implying, Shannon. And it further implies that if we are to really have the most beneficial impact and to handle in the fullest possible way the great crises of our times, whether they be national or social or local or global, then we're going to have to do a twofold work. Yes, we're certainly going to have to work to preserve our democracy and to feed the hungry and to reduce pollution, etc. It's a long list. But we're also called to, as you said, Shannon, do inner work to heal the psychological immaturities and dysfunctions within us, which individually and collectively create these problems. So we're actually called to do two kinds of work simultaneously. And that sounds like a lot, and it is. But of course, again, each of us needs to find our particular contribution, and focus our energies as effectively as we can. But there is a millennia-old practice for integrating these two aspects, and it comes out of India as karma yoga, karma meaning action and work in the world, and yoga being work on oneself. And karma yoga takes as the focus of our inner work our actions, our activity, our work and service in the world, and transmutes them into spiritual practice. So we not only work to, say, maybe for us it's feeding the hungry. We not only work to feed the hungry, but we turn that action, that contribution, into a learning process, and in several steps. One is we begin the activity by offering it to a higher good. So we're not just doing it for my little ego to feel good about feeding people, but it's offered to God or to Brahman or to the welfare of all. And then we do it as impeccably as we possibly can, while simultaneously bringing as much awareness to it as we can so that we can learn from it. If we really pay attention as we're doing our service, we notice that we get caught up. We get very attached to our way of doing it, and angry at people who get in our way, and frustrated that other people don't see our see how wonderful our perspective is, etc. And we get scared we're not going to accomplish what we want. All these reactions just going on in a simple day's activity, and we learn from those, and we learn as much as we can. And then the step which makes karma yoga such a wonderful knife-edge practice is that we do our services wholeheartedly as we possibly can, while simultaneously releasing attachment to the outcome. And it's that combination which turns this into a cathartic or clearing process of undermining our egocentricity and healing our hearts and minds in ways which are beneficial. And then finally, after we've done our action, we just stop and take some time to reflect and learn. And through those steps of offering the service to a higher good, to doing it as impeccably as possible, to really watching what's going on inside ourselves, and letting go attachment to the outcome, and then learning as much as we can retrospectively, we've turned what could be a simple activity into a whole practice. And in that way, our work in the world becomes both our service and our work on ourselves. And with karma yoga, there's this beautiful cycle. So we go out into the world to go more deeply into ourselves, and we go into ourselves in order to go more effectively out into the world. And it's that cycle which allows us to do exactly what you were saying, Jen, of working on ourselves and contributing at the same time.
I have to share this, Roger. So you shared this karma yoga practice in one of the papers that Shannon and I both read. And I have my book right here. This is how influential you've been every day. This is part of my everyday practice. And I have right here the karma yoga practice that you were instructing all of our listeners about.
Wow.
It has been so meaningful in my own life to engage in this practice every morning, and then reflect in the evening as your fourth step that you mentioned. So thank you for that. And thank you for sharing that right here on the podcast.
Beautiful. What have you noticed has come from it for you?
One great thing, and Shannon and I talk about this all the time, is letting go of outcomes. That one particular, I just want to call it, I guess, a mindset has become more infused in my body and my being. And it creates a much more, a lighter state for a person, right? Like, look, I'm giving it my best shot. And that's really all I can do, right? Also, I will say, in addition to this practice, I remember the story that you had shared about Buckminster Fuller, and I added at the top, before I begin, I say, I put out into the world, how can I live my life as an optimal instrument of service today? And
Beautiful.
that has been the shift for me, right? Whatever it is that I'm doing, I feel like I'm aiming. That's what I'm aiming for, instead of ticking off another goal. Is like, well, am I being an optimal instrument of service in whatever I'm doing? And also, whatever happens. I did my
Beautiful.
best.
Beautiful.
So thank you so very much for that.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's a beautiful story.
Roger, why is it important to kind of put these things that we're trying to accomplish in a agreement with yourself and the universe and others? You know, you're kind of saying that there are steps that we have to go through to kind of make this happen. Why is it important to kind of formalize it almost as an agreement yourself?
We can certainly agree that it's very valuable to make a commitment, and to even publicly make a commitment to share your aspiration with other friends, people you know. So as a way of just put it out there, and then you might even fill them in periodically on how you're doing with it. There's a whole skill in behavior change. This is the topic we're dealing with now. How do we change our behaviors and ourselves? And that's a whole skill unto itself, the art of behavior change. But certainly there can be value in making commitments, and there are skillful and unskillful commitments. Unskillful commitments tend to be unrealistic, perfectionistic, etc. Realistic expectations are, ideally something that's a little bit of a stretch, but you can do it, and you'll have a win. And then you do that for a while, and then you maybe add in something else, or you raise the bar, whatever it is. But it's important to be skillful in one's commitments and aspirations. And there are other things, such as, for example, if you're making a commitment to, say, you want to take up meditation, for example, it's not very effective to set a commitment of, I'm going to do half an hour every day. Much better to give yourself a little slack. I'll do, if I think I can really do half an hour, great. If I'm not so sure, maybe just 20 minutes. And I'll do it at least five times a week. So there's an art here. So, and part of it goes back to the earlier topic of being gentle with ourselves.
Thank you.
Since we're reflecting too on the readings, I know Shannon was just speaking of some of the readings that we've done of yours, and the reading where I learned about the karma yoga practice, the writing that you'd done around karma yoga. That particular paper, I'm almost afraid to bring it up. That particular paper started out talking about the meta crisis. And Roger, you were kind of walking us through, I felt like you were just walking us right into doomsday. And then I loved a shift that happened, and I'd love maybe if you could talk a little bit about it. There's a shift in the paper where you say, but why not be hopeful? What do we have to lose? And then you introduce this practice. And that moment of reading that was so important to me because I gotta say, I was down in the dumps when I was like, yeah, I know. Oh my God, are things really this bad? They're even worse than I thought. And then the shift that you make. How else are we going to change unless we're hopeful for the future? And here's a practice, as Carmia, here's a practice that we can engage in. So, um, share, if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit more about maybe as you were writing that paper, how you were shifting. Have you always had a mindset of hope? Like I'm grateful for it. Where did it come from?
Well, I think it comes in part out of a desire to just be as to write in a way which is as helpful to people as possible. And yes, it's really important for us to know what we're up against. But but there's a trap here. That is, if you present people with a dire situation and don't show them a way out, then people tend to close down, avoid even thinking about the topic. So it's much more skillful to lay out, here's what we're up against, and here's here are some things we can do. Here are what other people have done. In fact, since you talked about the meta crisis, the great complex of issues that we're facing as a society and a planet, every civilization runs into problems. The difference between, and we now know some of the differences between civilizations that survive and recreate themselves versus those that go down. And one of them is that there's a civilizational transformation and rebirth really requires a group of what's called a creative minority who see the issue first and then bring it to the attention of others and inspire people to make the necessary shifts. So we have examples of what works. And it just feels like it's just really important to present both sides. Just being a doomer and the belief that we're cooked just removes all motivation and probably a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the belief that it's really up to us. We don't know what's going to happen with the country or the world, but we can be pretty sure it's going to be a result of the choices we make, both individually and collectively. So it's up to us, effectively. And what are the most skillful attitudes and assumptions to hold?
All right. Well, thank you. This has been such an interesting conversation. And we wanted to kind of bring it into the here and now because something that is very alive in all of our minds is social media. We have this meta crisis, the environment and AI and social media, all of these things kind of clamping down on us. And I want to know, how do you see it shaping the crisis? Is it shaping the crisis?
Yeah, thank you. It's really one of the questions of our time because clearly I think there's widespread agreement that social media is playing an inordinate role in shaping attitudes and playing a role in exacerbating many of the issues we're facing. You mentioned polarization early on, and clearly social media does that. And you mentioned AI, and there's implications for that too. Social media was the algorithms, the computer programs underlying social media, were designed to keep people on the screens and engaged and ready to buy stuff. They weren't designed to create polarization, threaten democracy, or lead to massacres such as happened with Rohingya. And yet they did. They do. So Because the algorithms quickly recognized or discovered that the things which kept people most engaged were strongly emotive messages, particularly negative ones, which aroused anger, righteousness, and willingness to act that out, at least online. And so the media social media quite unintentionally came to exacerbate a variety of social ills, because it rewards the most inflammatory comments. It rewards falsehood rather than truth, because, and that's just not just my statement. There's a lot of research backing that up. That if you come up with an inflammatory half-truth or mistruth, it can be much more effective in getting promulgated than a calm, clear, factual analysis. So, as Maria Ressa, the Nobel Prize-winning journalist in where is it? I think Jakarta? No, Singapore. I think wrote that there's been this toxic sludge of venom released into the social media, and so you have this really really problematic issue here, underlying in many ways some of the some of the real problems we're seeing in society at the moment. And it's a real lesson for AI, because social media is really the first wide-scale interaction that humans had with AI.
Yeah.
Here are these, by current standards, and more so by future standards, very primitive AIs which were let loose running social media. And they weren't designed, as I said, to destroy democracies or create massacres, but they did as a collateral damage. So, and this wasn't foreseen. So when we recognize that the AIs that are being developed are way more powerful and presumably are going to have way more unforeseen consequences, it just suggests that we need to be very cautious and careful with AI, which is exactly what's not happening, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, just quickly, it's interesting, right, Roger? Shannon and I were talking before we got on the show with you, and we were mentioning, here we are. Are we part of the problem? We have our own podcast. You have a podcast, Roger. Are we part of the problem because we're part of the mediaverse and because of I'm part of social media, or is it all bad? It's all part of the algorithm, right? Or of course, I want you to say no.
Well, there are a lot of aspects and dimensions to social media, and one of them is the interactive social media, in which algorithms select for content. But since podcasts can be here, I think with podcasts it depends. We don't have an algorithm underlying us, although what we put out gets fed through various algorithms. But it feels like for a podcast, the question is, what's the content? Is the content designed to help and to heal and awaken and contribute? Or is it designed to inflame and do we basically sell our souls for likes? And so much, as with so much of life, to my mind, it depends on the intention with which it's done. And no good. Yeah, so that's enough, maybe.
Jen and I struggle with this. And when we were coming up with ideas for the podcast, we asked ourselves this question: is it crucial for us to engage in social media in order for us to fulfill this mission that we have on the podcast, right? And we came to the conclusion it is absolutely necessary to kind of play in this game, right? But it makes us very uncomfortable, and we're constantly reevaluating it, as we move along. One of the things that has helped me, and I appreciate what you're saying here about, is it good content, right? So I ask myself two questions before I put something out to the universe, on social media or whatever, when we're trying to promote our podcast. And I say, is this content authentic, right? And is it good content that helps us get to the mission that we're trying to achieve? And for Jen and I feel like every single post, I'm able to say yes to both of those things.
Beautiful.
So, right. So intention is the thing that I'm trying to integrate into, into how we function in society today with social media.
Yeah, sounds beautiful. Good for you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's a great criterion to ask ourselves. And I love the best description of right speech, or best definition of right speech I've run across came from the Buddha, who said, just ask, is it true and helpful? And I love that. And it's very simple, but a very beautiful guide. And clearly what you're doing, comes from a really good place, and you're trying to put out what is true and helpful. So it seems beautiful. And can anything we put on social media be misused? Yep. Can we say what we say in a way that minimizes that? Hopefully so. Yeah. But again, it feels like, as you implied, so much depends on intention.
Absolutely.
All right. So, Roger, we ask every guest this question. If your vision for the world could be limitless, right, what would be your new bliss for our world? Just envision the world in the most wonderful way possible you can for the future. What would the world look like to you?
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful question. There are two main streams of possible answers. One is to point to particulars, and another just simply to suggest that the world we probably all want to work towards is one which allows, which supports the best possible lives for everyone. Very simply, we can hold it as the minimizing, the relieving of suffering, and the enhancing of well-being. And the question of what well-being is, or optimal well-being, is it's kind of it's a placeholder for a vision that we can feel our way into over time. Because I think one of the things we realize is that the more we learn, the more we mature, the more we wake up, the more that, optimal well-being, it keeps growing. It's a wisdom question. What is optimal well-being? It's like, there's that possibility too, and there's this, and it's like, wonderful. Yeah, and maybe it would be another random thought would be, a world where everyone took as one of their life koans, how can I live so as to contribute most effectively to the welfare and awakening of all?
It makes me feel warm inside. I love that.
Good.
Every time we talk about this, I feel hopeful. And I think that's kind of a nice way to wrap things up. So as we conclude this amazing interview, Roger, thank you so much for your time. You've been so generous. You're a wealth of knowledge. And of course, we're incredibly grateful. We like to kind of wrap up with one word or phrase that you're going to take with you from our conversation, right? What is going to move you forward from this energy, this conversation that we've kind of created here together? during our last hour. What word or phrase are you going to take forward?
So what I'm taking away is wisdom questions. I love that we've categorized for you, that you've categorized for me question making in two ways, this knowledge questions and wisdom questions. And the notion that the right answer to a wisdom question can change from moment to moment, and has this, another phrase that I loved, fluid appropriateness. I've got to match the moment. I'm really going to be mulling this over probably for the rest of the night. So thank you so much for that. Wisdom questions.
Beautiful. Yeah. Shannon, do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to go with right relationship. I feel, after each conversation we have on this podcast, I just feel so much more connected to you all, to each other, and being in right relationship, I think, is the magic that I'm looking for
Beautiful.
moving forward.
Yeah, beautiful. Let's see, there are a few words that come to mind. Some years ago, I was inspired by a story of Gandhi, who was on a train about to leave, and a reporter came running up to him and asked if, do you have a message for the people, Gandhi? And Gandhi was doing one of his days of silence, so he wrote on his chalkboard, renounce and rejoice, which that is, let go of greed, etc., and rejoice in the simplicity that comes from that. So it raised the question for me, in approximately 3 words, what's your philosophy of life? Great question. So if you were to summarize your philosophy of life in 3 or so words, what would it be? So I thought about that, that for quite some time, and what I came up with was awaken, love, serve. And then a few years later, I felt that needs some time to add something else. So what I currently come up with is awaken, love, serve, and enjoy.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, Roger. We're so grateful for your time. This has been such a joy.
We have enjoyed this talk with you and this time with you, Roger. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom.
Ditto.
Okay, everyone, we have something really important to ask, right? Jen and Shannon are over here trying to save the world, and we need your help.
This is how you can help us. Go to Spotify, go to Apple Podcasts, go to YouTube, and hit like and subscribe. And let us know what you think.
And here's the thing, we're building a community, and this is the first step.
We can't wait to see you there.